They say the fog in Elmbrook never lifted, not entirely. It clung to the roots of the black ash trees like a second skin, rolled low and slow over the mossy roads, and slithered into the corners of houses before sunrise. By 1874, the fog was no longer seen as mere weather. It was a presence, a quiet companion to the town's stillness. Elmbrook Parish had been founded only 30 years prior by a small congregation of devout New Englanders who believed the outside world had grown too loud, too sinful. The town was a pocket of piety carved into the woods of northern Maine, a place of muted sermons, hand-sewn curtains, and eyes that watched but never spoke. The church sat at the highest point of the village, a Gothic structure of dark cedar and pointed spires that scraped the clouds, and beside it lay the cemetery, unassuming in size, yet eerily overgrown. That year, someone finally counted the graves. There were 216 stone markers, all uniform in shape, smoothed by age, but not time, for none bore a name, a date, or a carving beyond a small, shallow circle at the top, a sun without rays, or an eye closed in sleep. The town's birth records showed only 13 deaths since its founding. No official burials had ever been recorded. No obituaries in the Elmbrook Herald, no caskets lowered by grieving hands, no processions of black-veiled mourners. Just the quiet scratching of shovels in the night, heard faintly by those who lived closest to the hill, followed by the rhythmic, deliberate thud of earth being packed back into place. Pastor Jonathan Bell, a man of precise words and colder affection, claimed the graves were part of the town's preparations for the Lord's return, symbolic gestures of humility and readiness. When the trumpet calls, he once preached, we must not be caught without a place to rest. But some whispered otherwise. Children spoke of dreams that felt too real, of pale figures kneeling beside open graves and sliding into them with trembling smiles. One child, 8-year-old Anna Briggsley, told her teacher that she had seen a woman, still breathing, pull earth over her own chest with shaking hands, as if the ground itself had called her name. The teacher, Miss Loretta Wynne, brought it up during the monthly gathering at the chapel, her voice brittle as she asked if perhaps the girl needed help. Pastor Bell silenced her with a long look and a recitation from Job. The grave is ready for me. 1 week later, Anna Briggsley disappeared. Her parents, meek and broken, claimed she had wandered into the woods during the night, but her shoes were found the next morning, neatly placed on the church steps with the laces tied in an intricate knot, a knot Anna could not have made. That same day, the cemetery smelled faintly of iron and lavender. Miss Wynne attempted to rally the other townsfolk, especially the younger couples who had begun to question the pastor's teachings. But no one moved. Not the cobbler, who had started sealing his windows with pitch. Not the blacksmith, who had taken to sleeping in his workshop with a lit lantern beside his cot. Not even the Briggsleys, who stopped opening their shutters altogether. And so, the teacher took matters into her own hands. On the third night after Anna's disappearance, Miss Wynne walked up to the cemetery hill just before dawn. She found 12 new graves, freshly dug, no grass, no dew, just mounds of earth packed tight. And when she tried to enter the church, she found its doors sealed shut with iron nails driven into the wood so deeply that the hinges had warped. The bell did not ring that Sunday, nor did it ring any day after, The silence thickened in Elmbrook. The fog, once merely ambient, began seeping inside, into cellars, closets, and beneath beds. Children cried without knowing why. Mothers held them tighter. Fathers stared longer into their hearths. No one left town. The roads had changed. One man claimed he walked west for hours on only to end up at his own doorstep, blistered and wide-eyed. Pastor Bell was not seen for weeks. Then, one night, Miss Wynne woke to the sound of music, low, organ-like tones echoing from the chapel. She climbed the hill again. The graves now numbered over 300. Yet Elmbrook's population had not changed. Everyone was still there. Everyone but Anna. Everyone but Miss Wynne by the end of the next week. For on the 7th night, the church bell rang once, just once, at the hour of 3:16 a.m. And in the morning, the children walking to the schoolhouse found the teacher's scarf nailed to the church door, her name scratched into the stone threshold below in reversed letters, as if drawn from beneath the earth, not upon it. They say if you sleep on that hill now, your dreams are not your own. They say the graves call out to you, not with sound, but with invitation. And somewhere beneath the soil of Elmbrook lie not the dead, but those who agreed to pretend. Because in Elmbrook Parish, the only sin was staying awake when it was your time to lie still. By the summer of 1891, Elmbrook had become more rumor than reality. A whisper through the logging camps of Maine, a ghost town myth exchanged between railway men and traveling salesmen. For 17 years, no mail had been delivered there, no census takers had returned, and no merchants had dared to seek out its chapel market. That might have been the end of it, had it not been for the letters. 3 envelopes, yellowed and postmarked from towns no longer on maps, arrived at the main Capitol building within the span of a week. Each was written in an identical hand, spidery, slanted, sharp. Each contained a single phrase. "They're still here, but they're not sleeping anymore." Disturbed by the implications and unable to confirm if the town had even legally disbanded, the governor dispatched a small investigative team. 2 local bureaucrats and 1 state-sanctioned archivist, all instructed to report on the state of Elmbrook Parish and its curious cemetery. They expected to find an overgrown ruin, perhaps a fire-charred chapel, maybe a few stubborn homesteaders. What they found was far stranger. The roads leading to Elmbrook were nearly gone, swallowed by moss, flooded by stagnant water that smelled of decay and sage. The team arrived on foot, their wagon lost to the rot-slicked paths. As they emerged from the forest's throat, they saw the town exactly as described in the old plans. Church, cemetery, schoolhouse, 23 homes, 2 wells, 1 bell tower. Nothing had been destroyed. Nothing collapsed. But nothing moved. The people were there. Every last resident accounted for by the old registries. They stood in their gardens, on porches, in mid-step on walkways and wooden stairs. They stood in fields holding unplanted seed sacks. They stood in pews inside the church, rows and rows of them, upright and unblinking. Every man, woman, and child, all standing, not frozen, for their chests rose and fell ever so slowly. Not dead, for their flesh was not decayed. Not alive, for their eyes were vacant. And not dreaming, for they all stared at the same impossible point, directly above them, as if tracking something neither sun nor sky could reveal. The archivist, a nervous man named Elias Tren, was the first to suggest they check the church. Its great wooden doors, though scarred by weather and time, opened without resistance. Inside they found no dust, no cobwebs, no rot, just rows of parishioners, perfectly still, as if the service had been paused in some cruel loop. Tren took note of the pulpit, which bore unfamiliar engravings, symbols like inverted trees and spiraling eyes. He found the vestry door unlocked, and, beyond it, a narrow staircase leading to the basement, where the town's records were stored. But the scrolls and ledgers there were not written in English, not in any language the men recognized. Tren, fluent in classical Latin, blinked at the parchment and gasped. "It's Latin," he whispered, "but reversed, written from end to beginning, as if meant for eyes that read backward. The ink, at first assumed to be red ochre, reeked of metal and salt. A test conducted later in the capital confirmed the ink had biological components, somewhere between ox blood and something far less explainable. Atop the altar lay a wide map of the cemetery, hand-drawn, almost anatomical in its precision. The plots bore no names. Instead, each was marked with a sin. Not biblical ones in the traditional sense, but abstract ones. Resentment, complicity, forgetting. In the choir's corner, the investigators found journals belonging to Pastor Bell, who had not aged in the portraits since 1874. One entry chilled them beyond reason. Those who refuse to sleep must be taught the lesson of standing still. Let them watch the passage of the unseen. Let them ache in every limb until the soul begs for burial. That night, the three men camped on the town's outskirts, unwilling to share shelter with the frozen townsfolk. The first dreams came quickly. Tren awoke screaming, claiming he had been buried alive, not in dirt, but in a coffin lined with mirrors that showed not his face but versions of himself watching his own decay. The second man, Callum Brigg, was found by morning sitting in the well, soaked but alive, muttering in backward speech. He returned to the capital with eyes that never blinked at the same time. The third, Leonard Day, never left Elmbrook. His bedroll was found unrolled, untouched, but his boots were gone. Tracks led back into the town. Deep inside the church, where no investigator had dared remain before, they later found his coat folded on the altar and a new figure standing in the choir. One they swore had not been there the day before. Since then, all efforts to return to Elmbrook have failed. The fog returns thicker each time, and the path disappears by noon. But whispers persist in academic circles of a town whose people remain upright, watching the sky for a God that may never come, imprisoned in their own flesh, as punishment for sins not fully confessed. And beneath the chapel, in a room only hinted at in Bell's last journal entry, something waits, not buried, not alive, but patient. It does not move, it does not speak, but its dreams are catching. There are places in America where the map simply lies, where GPS spins in slow, confused circles, and roads loop back on themselves with the arrogance of something designed not to be found, but to be forgotten. And Elmbrook Parish is one of them. Tucked deep within a stretch of pine-thick wilderness, somewhere between the abandoned mills of northern Maine and the old French-Canadian trading routes, Elmbrook is the town that no satellite sees anymore, the village that disappeared without a fire, without a flood, without even a proper funeral. And yet every grave remains intact. The modern world first rediscovered it by mistake in 2007, when a pair of amateur paranormal researchers, siblings from Bangor, named Isla and Reed Calloway, attempted to trace a pattern in ghost sightings across Maine. Their digital overlay of historical records and satellite heat signatures flagged a dead zone in the middle of the forest, a zone that seemed to absorb signals and yet return the same image regardless of season, a still, fog-covered hill with no visible structures. Intrigued, they hiked into the area with handheld camcorders, but only one returned. Isla wandered out of the trees 4 days later, barefoot and nearly mute, clutching a shard of glass inscribed with a prayer written backward. Her first and only words were so, "It breathes under the dirt." Since then, Elmbrook has drawn in seekers like moths to a wound in the world. Cryptozoologists, conspiracy theorists, rogue pastors, rogue scientists, YouTubers with shaky GoPros and even shakier convictions. Few return with footage, but the stories they whisper are too consistent to ignore. They speak of a town where the air feels heavy, where birds won't fly overhead, and insects seem to avoid the soil entirely. They speak of buildings frozen in time, undisturbed by rot, and of a chapel whose bell rings not at noon, but at 3:16 a.m., always once, never twice. The most disturbing rumors, however, involve what lies beneath. In 2014, a discredited molecular biologist named Dr. Malcolm Reeds led an illegal excavation under the cemetery hill. His team drilled less than 12 feet before their equipment stalled. They hit not stone or wood, but bone. A network of ossuaries, intricately arranged, perfectly preserved, each skull positioned upright with the jaw slightly open, as if mid-prayer. Tissue samples suggested the remains were ancient, yet bore trace signs of cellular metabolism, impossible heartbeat rhythms, like echoes waiting to be noticed. One lab technician later suffered seizures after handling a femur from one of the sleeper graves, claiming he had seen a vision of himself watching his own birth from inside the ground. He quit the next day and refused to touch soil again. Scientists posited a theory. Some kind of anaerobic bacteria in the dirt had created a suspended state in the corpses, a pseudo-death, a liminal biology. But others whispered darker things. That the cemetery was not a graveyard at all, but a spiritual quarantine, a cage not for bodies, but for the weightless remnants of human will. That Elmbrook was never a town of the dead, but rather a holding zone, a halfway house for souls unready or unworthy for what lay beyond. This theory gained traction when drone footage, brief and flickering, captured symbols etched into the chapel roof, visible only under moonlight. Eyes with double pupils, serpents swallowing themselves, a circle of hands gripping a ring of teeth. The soil, some claimed, was cursed by a pact, the final sermon of Pastor Jonathan Bell, who is said to have sacrificed not lives but identities, asking his congregation to bury who they were so that nothing unholy might rise again. He taught them to lie still, but when stillness became agony, he taught them to stand, and when standing became unbearable, he taught them to vanish. Beneath the last row of graves is said to be a sealed chamber, unreachable by shovel or flame, known only by its cryptic name, the box of bone and glass. Not a coffin, not a vault, but something older, fashioned from polished femurs and human teeth, sealed with panes of leaded glass that reflect nothing but your fears. Inside it, no one knows what truly rests. Some say it's Bel himself, alive but inverted, his flesh inside out, dreaming backward through time. Others claim it's the spirit of the town, a collective will that grew too heavy for heaven or hell, now chained in a sacred tomb guarded by silence and blood. Engraved on the lid of this final resting place is a phrase so often repeated by those who have seen the map and lost their way. Do not awaken what was never meant to sleep. Today, Elmbrook cannot be visited. The forest closes. The fog blinds. Even satellites glitch when passing overhead. But hikers who stray too far north still tell strange tales, of bells in the night, of hands reaching from shallow graves not to drag, but to plead. They ask not for rescue, but for exchange. Some who enter don't vanish entirely. A woman in Portland once awoke with dirt beneath her fingernails and grave moss braided in her hair. A child born in Augusta last year will not stop drawing the chapel with its impossible angles, always with 216 figures standing beside it, always with a 217th figure crawling out from the earth, grinning. Elmbrook has no roads. Elmbrook has no weather. Elmbrook has no future. But it remembers. The dirt remembers every secret ever buried, every prayer half whispered, every sin disguised as piety, and in the center of it all, beneath the place where no map dares,